On June 3rd, the Senate approved the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act of 2020. This new act fundamentally changes the calculations that are done for loan forgiveness on the initial PPP. During this video, we're going to discuss the specific changes that are being suggested through this PPP Flexibility Act and how it might impact your loan forgiveness. Hi guys, Matthew Fulton with Parkway Business Solutions, and I want to thank you for joining us for another video as we continue this journey along for the Paycheck Protection Program. Now, we've been trying to be very specific about the videos we make, especially focused around times of change to help provide you the very specific information you need to be as successful as possible while attempting to get loan forgiveness. The part we're going to discuss today is specifically around this Flexibility Act. So to get started, the couple things that we found that have changed right off the bat is going to be, number one, the maturity of the loan. The initial PPP loan was set up to be a 2-year loan at 1%, which was actually going to have a 6-month deferral right from the beginning. Now the terms are being suggested to be changed to a 5-year maturity life. It does specifically state in the new language that nothing in the Act shall prohibit the lenders and the borrowers to basically mutually agree to changing these terms in a sense. So it's something to be watched for. But the intention of this, of course, is to make it longer instead of a 2-year to 5-year. Of course, banks will not be very happy with this because at that 1% interest, that's going to be a question of concern. It's my personal opinion this is something we need to watch, because I wish to remind everybody that these loans are actually eligible to be sold to the third market. So they can offload all these loans to somebody else. And if the banks were actually making, 1 to 3% on just the processing, if they gave a 0.5% kickback to whoever's buying it, it's still profitable for everybody else. Additionally, the deferred period, this is a very interesting change as well. So previously it was a 6-month deferral up to a maximum of basically 1 year. The way the language is written on this now, it says that it extended the date of repayment until the date on which the amount of forgiveness determined is remitted to the lender. Now, what that means to me, and this is my opinion of the reading of this as well as some of my associates, the timeline previously was we go through the whole process with PPP, we have to submit our request for loan forgiveness. The lender would then have 60 days to reply back to us, but the lender also has to deal with the SBA, who has 90 days to reply back to the lender on actual loan forgiveness. Now, what that created was a situation where businesses, especially those who may be watching this right now, maybe in week 7 or 8, and the way for all this timeline, you'd end up possibly having to make payments before you actually determined whether you were going to get loan forgiveness or not. So this new statement, I believe, is saying that the repayment won't start until after we get the answer back of, yes, this is going to be forgiven, this won't be, so forth. The forgiveness deadline, the eligibility for people to request forgiveness is 10 months after the last day of the covered period. And in a moment, we're going to talk about the covered period because that changed. So the covered period, this is, again, one of the biggest changes to really pay attention to. There's 2 parts to it. The covered period has been redefined to being on the date of the origination of the covered loan. I stress this because it used to be the covered period was the initial date of funding that you received the money. Or the origination of the covered loan, to me, would sound like the date of the loan docs. So we need better clarification to make sure that's exactly what was intended. Based off of that, so it's the date of the origination of the covered loan and ending the earlier of either 24 weeks, which is 168 days, or December 31st, 2020, whichever one comes first. Now, let's say you hadn't received any funding yet and you got funded on July 16th. That's that exact break even of 24 weeks or 168 days to December 31st. So hopefully this doesn't happen to many people, but for some reason, if you actually received funding after July like 17th or later, you actually would have your 24 weeks, in a sense, would normally go past December 31st, but you would be limited by that date no matter what. In a previous scenario that I did in a video, we kind of went through an example where we used a funded date of May 4th, because the funded date would have been the beginning of the covered period previously. And if we were going off of the 8-week covered period before, that May 4th would have been 56 days, would have gone until June 29th. Now, I'm going to make a quick assumption that the loan origination date was April 27th. And I did that because we know that they had to fund, from the date it was signed, they had to fund an account within 10 days. So the real answer is you'd look at your loan documents as soon as we know that's the true definition. You would use that specific date, and then you would base that out 168 days. In other words, 24 weeks times 7 days. In this type of a scenario, when we use our prior, when we use our prior scenario, this would mean the covered period now becomes April 27th to October 12th, the 168 days, to try to explain what changed. Safe harbor exemption. So this is another area that I'll go through questions at the end that have been generated because of this. But the language regarding safe harbor exemptions has now been changed. The question is whether it's been changed or modified or both, I don't know. During the period beginning on February 15th, 2020 and ending December 31st, 2020, the amount of loan forgiveness under this section shall be determined without regard to the proportional reduction in the number of full-time employees if the eligible recipient in good faith, so this is pretty much what I was kind of saying before until this part. The employee-based part of it is, well, if the employer or the recipient were unable to rehire individuals who were employees on February 15th, 2020, that specifically means you were unable to rehire the same employees you had on February 15th, could not rehire them, and you were unable to hire similar qualified employees for unfilled positions on or before December 31st. So that's one version. Now the or, and I want to stress this part of it. The or would then be by December 31st, 2020, if a business is unable to return to the same level of business activity they were operating at on February 15th, this would be another reason they could have the exemption. And I did change the order of the words to make it a little bit easier to read, but the concept is the same. So long as it's due to compliance with requirements, establishments, and guidance issued between March 1st, December 2020, and December 31st, and they list a couple different agencies specifically, as well as a maintenance, or because of the maintenance of standards for sanitization, social distancing, or any other worker or customer safety requirements. So basically, restaurants is a good example of this, right? If a restaurant is no longer able to be as packed because they have a smaller amount of space and they can't service as many people, well, that would bring into question the business activity level. Of course, we don't really have business activity level defined. So is that number of tickets? Is it revenue dollars? Is it number of employees? All that. So that's still a little vague, but this is a fundamental change on how that's being done. There's also some other limitations on forgiveness. The other limitations would be your non-payroll expenses versus payroll expenses. They didn't make any changes to how payroll expenses or costs are being defined, but they're saying it now needs to be a minimum of 60% for payroll expenses, and you could use up to 40% for non-payroll expenses. Same definitions again of payment on interest in that 40%, the covered rent and covered utility payments, and the definitions did not change on any of those. Now, I could have sworn on the previous bill, though, they also mentioned that any other, you could cover interest expense on other debt previously incurred prior to February 15th, and that is not mentioned in this at all. The 8-week covered period, they added something very interesting into this that basically says if you're an eligible recipient that you've basically already received a covered loan before the enactment of this subsection, you can choose to still go by the covered period and have the to end on the date that is the 8 weeks after the date of origination. That's changed. Again, origination used to be the first date it was funded, so we need that clarified. But it's saying you could still do that 8 weeks. What we don't know with that is, what about the FTE count? Does that still go by June 30th, or is that gone? Because specifically in this, it says that you strike any instance within these paragraphs of June 30th and you replace it with December 31st as if it never existed. So the questions I'm left with, and I'm suggesting people kind of pay attention to. Number one, since the covered period has been changed from 8 weeks to 24 weeks, will this change the calculation basically for the maximum loan forgiveness for employees who make over $100,000 a year? So again, because the calculation was done based on a covered period, which was 8 weeks. So that's why it was 8 divided by 52. Well, if the new covered period is 24 weeks, does that mean there's actually a higher amount of loan forgiveness? And how would that impact based on the amount of money you already received from a PPP? This is me being very, detail oriented, and I don't really think they're going to make much of a change there, but it's still worth asking the question. Number two question is, are the following exemptions still based on employee availability still allowed? So what I'm talking about is the safe harbor FTE employee reduction exemption, where you basically, if you offered a person in writing a job, they declined it, it would reduce your required FTE headcount. The following things I've listed are no longer in that paragraph, and I don't know if this is in replacement, which means employees who were fired for cause, voluntarily resigned, or voluntarily requested and received a reduction in their hours, would those no longer be included in that? This really means that the real change would be is if we're taking this all the way up to December, so what happens if somebody decides they want to take off and you're not able to, they leave you high and dry, right? They quit halfway through and you can't get the position refilled with somebody who's got the same level of qualifications. Are you no longer allowed to get that exemption? Number three, why did the beginning of the cover period change to the language of date of origination? I really want to understand how they're defining that, because I think that's going to be important. It could be a difference of up to 10 days. That's, over a week, obviously. Number four, if an eligible recipient received a loan, and if they choose to go forward with that 8-week period of time because they received it before, do they only need to meet the FTE requirements as of June 30th, or do they still have to do the one for December 31st? My concern is this a way that they can stretch this out and require people to keep the headcount up between June 30th and December 31st? And would that have any implication on your ability for forgiveness? And then the last question was, are the 5-year loans only available to loan recipients who basically had already received, that received their loans after this is enacted? There's some language in 2 different places that kind of conflict. One makes it sound like it's saying that if this is enacted, it acts as if it starts from the initial date of the CARES Act, which is me reading into it. But the rest of it actually makes it sound like if you received the funds earlier, you wouldn't be eligible for the 5-year loan. You'd only be eligible if you got a loan after this is enacted. So I want clarification on that. Hopefully this very quick video, tried to keep it shorter, but it's still trying to give you the information that you need, is helpful. We are continuing to stay on top of this and try to make sure that you are informed of the most important changes as they're coming out. If you've got questions, please continue to add them in the box below. I'd also like to ask everybody, if that's watching this, I'd love to find out when you leave your comment, what week are you in during your PPP course? How long ago did you get it? I'm really interested to see how many people are really close to this 8 weeks and how fair this really is. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Make sure you hit the bell so you're notified of the new videos as they come out. But as always, here's wishing you all a very successful week. Thank you so much.